Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Writers Series. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We host readings and writing workshops for youth and adults. Currently, they are all online. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. We're so happy tonight to have Keith Wilson. He is an Affrilachian Poet, Canem Fellow, and graduate of the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop. His book, Fieldnotes on Ordinary Love, was selected by the New York Times for its Best Poetry of the Year list and was lauded by Publishers Weekly as romantic yet world-weary, bereaved yet fortified, a kindred reflection of the heart in the modern world. A game designer, he serves as assistant poetry editor at Four-Way Review and digital media editor at Obsidian. He lives in Chicago. He'll also be teaching an online workshop this Saturday on visual poetics for us. I'll put the link in the chat. There's still room to sign up, as well as where you can buy his book at our bookstore, Ampersand Books. First, we'll hear from Keith. Then he'll be in conversation with the poet Malcolm Tariq, who is the author of Heed the Hollow. If you have a question, you can submit it through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Keith, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Making sure that I'm not muted. Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm going to be reading from my book, Fieldnotes and Ordinary Love. I may maybe try to share a visual poem since I'm teaching a class on that. But Zoom, I don't know, Zoom can be sort of finicky, so I'm sort of going to play it by ear. But I'm going to start off by reading a poem, one of the love poems from my collection. It is one of the familial love poem, so it's about my dad and sort of the complicated ways that we inherit legacy and masculinity. It's called The Way I Hold My Hands. I can't imagine my father wishing he would rather be anything. Once upon a time, he was a watermelon growing from a box. His mother died. His father beat the blush out of him, and teardrops dripped black from his face into his food. My father's father made him eat his dinner through himself, the miracle whip salad spangled like the garden in dew. This isn't a figure of speech. My father ate his blood. It's hard to think he must have been young. He made me stop all my life. He told me not to be a girl. Whatever I was doing, of course I stopped. He kissed me on the top of the head before I went to bed each night. He was always there. He read to my brother. He read to me from a book of animals. This is a fox's paw. This is a bear's, he told me. I'll give you something to cry about. He never touched me. Bear claw, I said. Winters are easier for bears. I spread my fingers over his. No, my father said. So one of the troubles of reading from my collection for me right now is that a lot of my poems are sort of melancholic, and I'm just getting a lot of that in life right now. So I'm gonna read a couple more poems. But also, I'm going to try to hit a couple of the ones that are a little more uplifting, hopefully. This next poem is one of my ekphrastic pieces. So I have a number of poems that are in response to paintings. And this one is called The Floor Scrapers, which if you're at a computer right now or a phone, you can maybe look up. It's one of my favorite paintings, and I had the chance to see it when it was in Chicago for a moment. Yeah, this is Floor Scrapers. Whatever they say of the heart, the truth is this: we embody our hands. Every morning I have my look at them, my hands cupping my face, a bowl of water. What will I make of these pliers, this filigree of clams? I love how the light lollips from knuckle to knuckle like a fox across a lake. What is the rest of me but a daydream of angles? What but a happening of curves? When I am freest, when I'm at peace. It is only the light making palatable my hands, in a grasp, in a reach like this, as when a man offers his an extension and becomes before me a basilica. And I watch the gleam of the fish-throated muscles of the back, the narrow bones and knees, and I say again, the knuckles, each a chamber for a whole religion performed by the hands. Hands doing, possessing, and pressing firmly to the ground to scrape. If you've ever taken the dark meat from a thigh bone by your teeth, like that. And his back is a crowbar for the actions being completed by the palms of him, his intersections, the fingers lolling over each other like men on a rocking train. And I see the light and the labor both, and the ordinary somersaults of the rib cage and viscera, they say the heart. But I see the fingers motioning like this too, and my own hand, curled like a conversation made after light has ceased to bluster in the caverns of the eye, and sits, thick and pleasant as a man having worked himself religious. Again, they say, the heart. So the next poem I'm going to read, I have a lot of romantic love poems. So I'm going to read one of those. I'm going to read a poem called 645. One of the things that I was really interested in when I was working on this this collection was really thinking about really ordinary moments of love, meaning rather than like thinking about the really bombastic parts of a relationship, which are sort of often the things that we're really drawn to, is like the moment of breakup or the moment that two people met and everything was amazing or terrible, or really grand events that they had to overcome. I was really interested in just very regular things, the things that make up the majority of our time with someone that we love. And so this is about waiting for the lover to come home from work, 6:45 p.m. And the door opened in as a sapphire asserts a certainty of blue and you through the hall like an alarm. And my body determines some parcel of space, your lips in passing. And you reclined into the silence of the bed and must always have found yourself there while I was not thinking. How surely you dreamed. And what was in your head was a better thing than art, or rather, it was more beautiful to wonder than to know. The absent-minded stretches of you where I might, while sitting, hit a deer. What made you finally stand? It's astounding I never upset you of your mystery. Loving is a misnomer because you are expected of your heart's opinion on a sentence that is never completed, even as you're having it. Nothing must be more free than the feeling of the right to leave. You were really something like a cutting, the way you laid yourself in water every night reading. But the days average on, and the planets circle round us like sharks. God, it's pretty. But what does any of it mean? So now I'm going to give it a shot, I think. I'm going to sort of try to screen share. So if someone can I do have that granted. I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work, I will abandon ship and read something else. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. Can someone who has a mic let me know? I guess that you can see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Zoom is very unintuitive. So this might be a little hard to read, but hopefully my reading it will sort of make up for that. It sort of really depends on your screen size. But this is really the earliest visual poem that I have, and I've been working on those primarily. So this is not in my book, and none of my visual poems are, but they're sort of available online, some of them. And this is called Uncanny Till. It's based on a graph of a concept called the uncanny valley, which I think more people know about it now than they used to. It's sort of a term from robotics and animation that talks about this like weird point at which people become intensely troubled by essentially like upsetting a binary. So like to the left of it are where people are comfortable. They recognize something as human, as whatever the identity is. And on the right of it, people are, wait, no. So on the right, people are comfortable because they recognize the thing as like fully that thing. So they recognize like an animation as it's so human that they just believe that it's human. And on the left are things that are sort of cartoony, and people are comfortable with that. And sort of in the trough are things that are like polar, what is it called, Polar Bear Express or whatever, like animations that trouble people because they're kind of real but kind of not. And I'm just interested in the way that that sort of maps onto identity and people's perceptions. And this is using that graph with the story of Emmett Till. So there's a legend here that is, the dotted lines are boy and the solid lines are a world. Only in retrospect is an animal worth recognizing. Something surely filled the time before the gunshot. A wolf whistle. Here lies the bullet, call him Ishmael, laying like a nail in the esophagus of the Tallahatchie River. The body. Let the people see what they did to my boy. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. God is good all the time. All right. All right. I'm gonna read just, I think, 2 more poems. I'm gonna read Fieldnotes, which is sort of the central poem of this collection. Fieldnotes 1. In physics, dark matter isn't made of anything. It's a free citizen that passes unburdened through the field, through itself, through you. 2. It helps to observe from a distance, the field, for instance, as a statement the South has chosen to make. The way whiteness, too, is often rhetorical, as when an older student remarks, in those beginning days, that only he observed MLK's holiday, while his black friends working did not. 3. Sometimes love is a black dot in a field, sometimes suddenly it is not. 4. Or how can black be the absence of all color? Take this cruiser, see the light strike blue off the car like copper through a fountain. 5. There is a difference between what is fair and what is just. For instance, it is fair that I try to love your skin even when it is not touching my own. 6. Whiteness is an alibi. The way the officer was like a steam engine, only I could see. 7. Inside, where nothing shows, I am, of course, not black, but that does not matter to the field. 8. Some colors are indistinguishable at night. Put your hands behind your back, a different cop once asked me. It was so sincere. He was so polite. 9. As a boy, you learn to know the inside without being required to feel it, as when now I understand a bucket or a hood. 10. He asks my girlfriend not if she is white, since even in this light, what we are is obvious, but instead he speaks philosophically. Ma'am, he asks, are you here of your own free will? 11. Sometimes whiteness is a form itself of hyperbole. Try this. Sit in a field. Then try reading Andrew Jackson's quotes on liberty, only pretend they're being written by his slaves. 12. Look at the word black on the paper, and you will see a definite black, a kind, a certainty, or if you see nothing at all, that of course is a kind of black too. 13. By the road, my father showed me cotton once. Look at that, he said. The poem I'm going to close with is about a kind of, I mean, on one hand, it's about love, but I think it's about a kind of radical love in which you find a way to love someone without needing to have anything in common with them. I think it's really common that we try when we meet a stranger or when we're trying to sort of get along with someone to try to find our commonalities. And I don't know, I'm interested in wondering what it's like when that doesn't become a necessity, or when you hit a gap in which you actually can't find very much in common with someone. How do you find it in yourself to still love them? Because I think you should. So this is called I Find Myself Defending Pigeons. I love how you never find their bodies, how they never rest their eyes. I love how their breasts are comforters unfolding by their breath. I love that pigeons live in the city, that underestimation never stopped a pigeon from unlatching itself or being old. I want them all unspooling in the air, and bridges that are half sigh and half pigeon. I want to harbor their coo and utilize it for energy. I want to learn to use them the way they want to be used. I want to pigeon tail into a quiet night, to let their oddness. You can never know a language until you quiet your own. I want people to write about them. They're leaving ships for land or standing on their own on a marble statue in the shimmer of a field. I want to talk about the term rock dove, argue over whether or not it's imperialist. I want the media to implicate us in the pigeon problem, for a couple to sit with their asparagus and kids and realize none of this is far from them, whatever we think. I want oils and watercolors and inks. I want still life with pigeons, since not a one has ever been portrayed with soul. A flight of them around old bread, and how they're all the same. How all the world is here with them in hate, since they are rats adorned with angel wings. And the children down the street are free to chase their drag. They want to see a pigeon's rouge entirely. Let the pigeon have her pigment. Consider the pigeon's brown and green and everything. The brandishing of his nakedness to the sun, as if nothing is absolute. I love the pigeon's shoulders, tongues, and wedding nights. I love the pigeon's place in history, their obsession with living in the letters of our signs. I love their minds, or what I've come to believe is their theology. Who knows? Let the pigeons speak. Ask the closest pigeon for his number, for her middle name, if they are ready to die, if the sky gets crowded enough to consider war, if their stores are closed on Sundays. I want to be ready for them to be just like us, but more ready for them to be completely different. I don't want to waste any time tracing a pigeon's God to Abraham. I want to get started. Some of us feed pigeons. I love sometimes our care. I love, I think, the park bench. I love apples, but I do not love pears. The weather. I love the pigeons, the revolution of wheel to sky. I love the newspaper graying in a different air. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Thanks, Keith. That
Thank
was a
you.
great reading. I think this is the first time I heard you read, which is nice.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Very cool. So I have a few questions, but if anyone in the audience has questions, I encourage you to write them in the Q&A chat function, and we should get to them soon. So I think I have some questions that I think about a lot, but never ask people. And one of them, you read, the first poem you read, you introduced as a love poem. And a lot of these in the book are love poems. And earlier today, I was walking, I live in Brooklyn in New York, and I work at Canem, and I was walking to the office, because I walk to the office on Wednesdays. And for some reason, I recalled this interview that Jericho Brown gave, and he said that every poem was a love poem. And I didn't read the interview, I think, because I didn't want to be convinced that every poem was a love poem. And I don't know how I feel about it. I think about it a lot, like maybe every poem is, like I try to justify it to myself, but I think because I'm like, sometimes you're just mad, but that doesn't mean that it's not a love poem. Anyway, the question that I have for you is like, do you think that every poem is a love poem, and why?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, Jericho is brilliant, for one thing. So I'm like definitely inherently inclined to give this extra thought. But I think so. Before I get to it, I guess one of the things I think is really interesting is the power that we give romantic love, like like now, but also just historically. That's really oftentimes like the love, that if you're going to make the most epic thing, like love sort of often has to sort of be at the center of it somewhere. A lot of times, or the absence of, like, the reason this whole thing happened is because I lost my love, or the reason that all of this happened is so that I can pursue my love. And so a part of me is inclined to sort of think, a part of me like really loves the idea of every poem being about love, because that like level of pursuit, I think is like at the heart of writing a poem. Like, the only reason you're spending this much time writing about it is that there's something about it that you're sort of obsessive about. And like there's like an overlap in some ways maybe between like the way that we often envision romantic love, like whether or not that's healthy is like another question, but like that like level of obsession, I think does sort of map onto a lot of times the way that we write about things. And like maybe some of us are like, yeah, like when I'm writing an angry poem, there's a part of me that maybe is like in love with that feeling. Like it's like not a great feeling, but it's also like one I'm kind of comfortable with in like certain, contexts, and or I'm like comfortable with like sort of releasing in a particular way. So yeah, I don't know. I have to think more about it, but a part of me kind of believes that.
Yeah, it's a deep question. And
Yeah.
and to what you're saying, like I feel that when I'm like mad or angry about something, that is when the writing comes easily, at least like a first draft or two. But it is that urgency of the anger that leads me to the writing, which I actually like to do, like I like to write. So it's just unfortunate that I have to be mad to do it.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not like I'm in love with the subject matter, but like even the act of writing the poem can make the poem a love poem, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know. It's also, it makes me think of like this idea in with like cooking, that people say like you can tell when something was made with love. And I wonder, like, this is like maybe tangential, but like, is there a way to show that I guess there is sort of a way to show that you're angry through cooking, but like is there a way to cook well in a way that like expresses a different emotion than love? Like maybe like all art is sort of like somehow bound in love in some way, but I don't know. I don't know.
These are the questions.
Yeah.
So you read the visual poem, and no, I've never written a visual poem. But I know people who do, like you write them, Alison Rollins writes them, she writes amazing visual poems. And I mean, sometimes when I look at it, I'm like, okay, I don't know how to read this. And it takes me like time to do the thing. But what do you, I guess, how do I ask this question? Like, what do visual poems give you that like a written poem doesn't?
Yeah.
Or, like, is it more challenging? Does it give you like another meaning behind the poem? Like what does a visual poem do?
So it's definitely more challenging. I'm not like necessarily, I'm not a visual artist, and I'm not necessarily a visual person, but I think like in the way that some people seem to be, like they know they can like make an outfit, and they can like arrange a room, or like there's like many different ways of like being really visually oriented, and I feel like not particularly good at any of those things. And so one of the things that I'm interested in weirdly about visual poems is that they have commonality, in my opinion, with like form at large in poetry. So like I'm really interested in the idea that like the very fact that you're writing a poem as a sonnet without even writing anything else, just that you chose to write a sonnet, has some kind of meaning. And so like it means maybe, or at least there's like the beginning of some sort of meaning. So like maybe it means that like I want to be part of that tradition. I want to be part of a tradition of sonnetteers. Maybe it's like a resistance to that tradition, where you're like, I'm going to make a sonnet because people like me were never allowed to write sonnets. But like that's all just happening just from the fact that you chose to write a sonnet, like that's the form that it took. And so one of the things that I'm really interested in with visual poems is thinking about like the sonnet is a literary tradition, and like what other formal traditions are there that I can sort of like draw from or have access to. So like I think of visual poem, that visual poem like involves like an actual diagram or drawing, but I also sort of like include poems that look like I have a couple of poems that are recipe poems. They like are name of the recipe, ingredients, and directions to make the thing. And recipes actually visually look a certain way as well. Like you can tell if someone opens a cookbook and shows it to you and it's too far away to read it, you can still probably tell it's a cookbook, like just by like the format of it. Like there's a visual thing, a visual cue. So part of it is just like what a visual sort of brings to it. The other thing is like paradoxical, because I think visual poems, as you said, like super confuse people sometimes, or they're like, and super confused people who are like highly poetry literate, like you know, have read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of poems and really love them, but then come to a visual poem and are like, I don't 100% know what's happening here. But on the other hand, I think visual poems actually potentially open up a poem to people who don't have access, for whatever reason, to like literary traditions. So like a person can look and see that this thing looks like a recipe, even if they don't have any idea what a hustle is or what a sonnet means. And so there's like a weirdness there where like I'm like alienating a lot of people by writing a visual poem, but also like opening it up to like another group of people who access things differently, I guess.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, once I heard Allison read one of her poems, then I kind of figured out kind of like my way like around them. But when you read yours today, I think my inclination was to read everything above the graph first and then read everything at the bottom, which would have been
well, one thing, I normally say this right before I read a visual poem, I didn't do it this time, is like, I think of them as sort of like their own thing, and I'm not really used to even reading them out loud, and every time I read them out loud I have to like just make a decision, and that, you know, I'm like, I have to, if I'm going to say it out loud, I have to decide the order to read things. Right. And I don't necessarily mean that to be like the way to read it. I'm like really interested actually in like the way that when you come to a visual work of art, there's like no way of telling where your eye is gonna, there's like things that you can do to try to draw someone's eye to a certain part of the painting or whatever the thing is. But I love, one of the things I love about visual art is that it's so open to like movement and interpretation, and who knows like what someone's going to be focused on. So
okay, so you said that you're not very visual or like artistically visual, but you're a game designer. And so, I mean, I don't really know what goes into game design, but does game design inform your poetry in any way?
I think
are the reverse? Does your poetry inform your game design?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I've never even thought about that. I think that is definitely true. I think my poetry and my reading poetry definitely affects how I receive games and how I make them. Like I give games close reads that a lot of people who consider themselves gamers like just don't care to do. Games for a lot of people are like nothing but fun, and there is, you know, a kind of culture around fun that involves not being like critical of it at all, like not thinking like, is this dangerous, this kind of fun, or whatever. But I don't know, like in terms of, does it like, I think certain like sort of philosophies that maybe are born from playing and making games have found themselves in my poetry. I think game design has like given me access to learning a bunch of different technologies that like are how I'm even doing this. So like I learned how to use Photoshop, and so I can like change an image in a way that that lets it even happen. Like I don't have to ask someone else to do it. I don't have to hope that I can find something that already looks the way I need to look. I can just make it be. So that's like one thing, it's just like technically. And then the second thing is just like game design involves a lot of caring about and being open to the audience accessing that thing. And so weirdly, that's like, there's like a white poetic tradition in which that's unheard of, but like in Black art forms, often like audience participation is like key. And so that's like not the only place that I've sort of have had access to or seen that happen, but it's definitely a thing happening in games where I'm like, it's okay for you to do something in this that I didn't plan for. Like that's like maybe part of the art. And so like visual art, visual poems are sort of like that, where if you read it in a different order, I'm like open to that in a way that, you know, there are certain poetic traditions that are not open to that kind of interpretation. Like there's like, it's like a code and you're supposed to break it, as opposed to you're an audience member, you can sort of participate in it.
True. Okay, we got a question. And I don't know if you can, I think you can see the question, Keith, but I'll read it out loud. So knowing a little about your writing life, I know for a while you wrote a poem a day. Could you talk a little about that and how you would say that has impacted your voice or style? Also, what are some things that writing a poem a day taught you about writing?
Yeah, I still do that kind of. I think sometimes it's helpful for me that I don't even think of them as writing poems. I'm like writing, it's almost like journaling. So I'm writing every single day. And part of that journaling involves me like trying to sort of play with poetic things. So like normally when you journal, you just write. But I'm like, actually, when I'm journaling, I'm like thinking about line breaks in a way that like you wouldn't necessarily think when you're like writing in a diary or a journal. So I still do that. And it's radically changed the way that I create things because I'm generating so much writing. And not, the vast majority of it's terrible. Like just like with journaling, if you go back and read what you've written, a lot of it's like not what you really want to share with people. It's like not always coming from the best place. It's like not well crafted. But regardless, I have like a lot of things, and I go through them and sort of pick out snippets. And I think that like short form writing of where I have like lots of like material, I have lots of like short snippets of things, really opened itself up to visual poems in which I have these snippets and I'm moving them around on the page. So I think it's directly sort of led into that. Something that I learned from writing a poem a day is really just like not being, like really just being okay with writing terribly. Like it's really, you really cannot care. You can't be like obsessed with like really writing well when you're doing it every day. There's so many days where I'm just writing about the wall that I'm looking at or the sound of the air conditioner or whatever. And I think there's like a part of me that like really loves that like I remember a younger version of myself would just wait for a poem to happen, and that meant that poems never happened. So like now I'm like writing every day, and sometimes in the middle of writing about the air conditioner, I start daydreaming. I'm like, oh wait, I have something that I can do here. So that's like an important thing I learned. It's just like not to be obsessed with being good.
Yeah, that reminded me of that Mary Oliver poem, Wild Geese, which I also thought about on my walk home. Yeah, a lot of people have like a daily writing practice. I don't. It's just, I don't know, maybe I should try. But I do like journaling, which I also don't do often. Like I think I do, but then I look in my journal and it's been 6 months. Like so much time.
Yeah.
I'm very
That's always
terrible
what happened to me too. Yeah. I mean, it's different for everyone because for some people, because I know when I'm teaching, I'm like, you know, I'll like suggest certain things that I've learned, and it's like becomes sort of clear that really depending on your personality type and the kind of art that you're creating, that like idea of having to write every day, can really just destroy your whole art practice. Like that might not, you know, it really depends on the person, and especially like the kinds of things that you're writing about. Like if writing is really, if you're writing about things that are triggering, like maybe that's not something that you just jump into willy-nilly and are like, I'm gonna do this every single day. Like maybe there's like a more informed practice than the way that I'm doing it. But yeah, for me, it's sort of changed the kinds of things I write about and how I sort of collect it and everything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have one more question, and then we'll let Dan get back on and do the closing. So what are you reading these days? Because I have a backlog of books that I need to read, but I keep buying them, so I'm always looking for new books. So what are you reading like that's giving you some type of inspiration or new ways of thinking?
I have it like right next to me. I was doing the Sealy challenge this month because I was away from my library, and so I've been reading a ton right now. It's really hard for me to think of names off the top of my head for some reason, even though I'm like actively reading these. But I'm also reading. I have a stack of chapbooks that I've collected over the years, and I'm like, I don't know if I've even read all of these. So I've been reading chapbook after chapbook after chapbook. In terms of like classic stuff, I'm returning to Gwendolyn Brooks and Lucille Clifton recently. Two of my favorites who I'm like I will return to a million times. I just got Just Us by Claudia Rankine. So I'm just like cracking that open, but she's my poetic hero. There's like no better poet in my opinion who alive today. So that's definitely really inspiring me. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I like that. I also do really love Gwendolyn Brooks. And I read her a lot.
One of the things I have her book Blacks, and the range of poetry in that book too makes it like one of my favorite collections. Like she has poems that are super narrative and highly formal and sort of traditional, and then by the end of it it's like very Black arts movement, and just like reading the whole thing, not all at once, but just like jumping back and forth and seeing sort of like this progression and this change. Yeah, she's incredibly inspiring.
I mean, she lived like an average amount of time, but her writing life covered such a great span of like decades and like movements that that book is really, I call it a Bible, because it's just something that you can go to for like anything almost. Like there's even fiction in there. There's
a whole like poetic novel in the middle of it. Yeah.
It's definitely maybe like my number one. Thank you. This is great. Thank you for entertaining my questions.
Thank you.
About love and game design.
Two of my favorite subjects. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly. Is Dan going to come back? Okay, there he is.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Keith, and thank you, Malcolm. This was great. I say Fieldnotes on Ordinary Love is available at Ampersand, and Keith is doing a workshop on Saturday. The links for those are in the chat. So thank you to everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.